Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, based on what time zone you're joining us from. Thank you so much for being with us today for our webinar, Stop the Profit Leak, Bridging the Gap Between Your Ideal Price and Your Final Sale. My name is Malcolm Kerr. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Sistine, and it is my honor to introduce our two hosts today, Matt Jetmore, the Director of Business Strategy for Slabstack, which some of you may already know. Sistine acquired Slabstack in December, so we were lucky enough to have Matt join us through that. Matt's experience is broad-ranging in the ready-mix industry. He spent a lot of time at Lauren Concrete, as well as VCNA and a few other places, working across all the different functions in ready-mix. So he is very well qualified to be the co-host here, and we're grateful to have him on. And it's also my honor to introduce Stevenson, also known as Steve Brooks, the heavy materials sales trainer and coach. Great prominent figure in the industry. He is a heavy materials sales trainer and coach, but more specifically, kind of focuses more on ready mix, but kind of covers the whole gamut. So we're honored to have him on here as well. So before I pass off the talking stick to these two, I just have a few housekeeping notes. The first one is right now, we cannot see or hear you. Everyone that's attending is in listen only mode. If you want to ask a question, there's a little speech bubble in the top right-hand corner. So type your questions in and we'll get to those towards the end of the webinar. The other thing that I'll point out, we had some issues when we were running through practice where the slides were way too zoomed in. So just note if that happens to you, there should be a little plus and minus button on the right side of your screen that will allow you to zoom in and zoom out. So if you're having issues with something being way too zoomed in, just mess with those buttons there and they'll get you sorted. Okay, I think that's all the boring stuff out of the way. Now I will pass it to you two to run through today's content. This will be a really good one. So again, thanks for joining us today. And Matt, Steve, pass it off to you.
Thanks, Malcolm. We're really excited to be here. Steve and I have had some great discussions over the last couple of weeks. I'm running the slides, so I get the privilege of trying to keep us on track here. It's really been exciting to talk to Steve. Over the last 5 years, I've really spent a lot of time on sales, but my background has been trying to push those costs down. The cost is a really important part of margin, but that top line is just as important, if not more important. And what we're here to talk today is what we've called the profit leak. That's where your margin decreases as that top line specifically starts decreasing. Some of the areas that we're going to get into are quoting without confidence, giving margin away at the table, and then not having a systematic review of those margins to see where you're at. We've organized our thoughts into what we call 4 tenets. In the interest of keeping us on track, I'm going to introduce our first tenet here, which is what we are calling know yourself. What that really boils down to is knowing what your costs are. You can't sell something profitably if you don't know what it costs. I'm going to jump over here real quick to our Slabstack product. Let's see if this does this. And I just want to give an example of costing and how it's important to know your costs. Here on Slabstack is our quote where you quote a specific product. So in this example, which I've pre-filled out, is a 3,000 PSI, 1,000 yards of that. We're going to price that at 138 bucks. That's going to give us a margin over material, less delivery or MOMD, 28%, a margin over material of 37%. Our target margin is 25%. Our suggested price at that 25% came back at $131. Our list price is $164, and our unit cost is $98.30. Now, the important thing, and this is what we're talking about, know yourself, is knowing where your costs are, or knowing what those inputs, the costs are. Those main inputs are your load size, your pour time, your wait time, and your travel time. In this case, it's given us a delivery cost of $12.30. Now, where I'm saying it's important to know yourself is, and I think many of you that have operations experience are jumping in here are looking at these are really best case numbers. 10, 10 cubic yards, load size, that may be the size of your truck, but is that really reasonable? I would argue that it's not, and that your load size is probably more of 8.5 to 9 yards. So let's go in here and pick 9 yards. You can see already what that's doing to our delivery costs. That's up by $1.30 right there, just in the yard size change of 1 yard. And again, checking out these pour times and wait times, let's go to a more realistic pour time of 30 minutes and a more realistic wait time of around 20 minutes. So you can see that our delivery cost has gone up $7 a yard. You can imagine what that's going to do to your margin. It's crushing it. Now, our actual margin has gone to more like a 24% from a 25%, and our suggested price has gone more to $141.50. 140.50. So it's important to see that, with a $7 cost, that's all the difference in margin, and $7 difference in margin is the difference probably between making money and this job being a great job and this job being a loser. So that's why I'm saying it's important to know yourself and knowing those inputs. And I've seen a lot of these kind of worksheets turned in with $10 10 yard load sizes. It's easy to fool yourself. So know yourself, don't fool yourself. And Steve, what are your experiences on costs and what those costs do to margins?
Yeah, I love this. Thanks, Matt and Malcolm. Thanks for having me. So this screen, I get excited to see it every time you show it to me. So yeah, I think that, not only I just did the math, 1,000 yards, if that's 10 yards per truck, that's 100 loads we're going to have to send, right? That's a lot of resources we're sending out there. But then you made it 9, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we're going to have that many more trucks, that much longer of a day. You stretch out the wait time, the pour time, it starts getting longer and longer and more difficult. I think oftentimes sellers are complaining that dispatch is letting them down. Oh, we're blowing them up on service. It's like, yeah, but they're just shipping the work that we sold. So I think knowing what we can do and how we do it, I think tying in that operational data to a salesperson's, dashboard, if you will, right here, really helps tie in the idea of like, oh, I'm actually selling future resources. I'm actually selling my plant's capabilities, let alone at a good margin, but at least now I'm starting to understand the logistical good things or nightmares that I'm creating for my company. And so I think it's great. Most of the companies I work with have either I shouldn't say most, some of them have spreadsheets and some of them have it in their head from 30 years of doing it. And other people do have some systems that are starting to get the data, but most of this is locked up in operations, not in sales.
Yeah, there are ways of doing this. Going back 20 or even 40 years, the beginning of my career, the first thing I was told by a mentor was just double your material cost. That doesn't work so well in this day and age, and why a tool like Slabstack can really help you not only understand your cost, but understand your capacity and what that's going to do to your operations department. So I'm going to flip back here to our slideshow. And one of the things we want to leave you away or leave you with on Tenant 1 of knowing yourself is that watch out for your own blind spots on understanding these costs. Moving on to Tenant 2, know your market. You have to understand the market that you're selling into. 3 different things here. Of course, there's many more, but 3 important things. The market price for this type of work, not just the type of job, but the type of work. Is this caissons? It's real easy to fool yourself about a bridge that it's going to be fast, big load sizes that unload quickly, but there's a lot more that goes into a bridge than just that deck. You need competitive intelligence about where your competitors are located and how they approach work of this. And then, of course, the volume versus margin trade-off. I think a lot of us have seen the example illustrated where you show what it does to your profit by an increase in 10% of volume at the same price versus the same volume with a 10% increase in excuse me, same volume with a
Right.
10% increase in price. And the difference is stark. And when we talk about managing that price, really what we're talking about is managing margin. Steve, what do you think some of the most important things to know are about knowing your market before bidding?
Yeah, so I think this is an area that oftentimes the sellers that I coach, they seem they're pretty good in this area. So again, slide one, the knowing yourself, like we kind of intuitively know some stuff, but the data doesn't always come through. But this one, I feel like this is a strength for most sellers that I work with. They, they're always asking, what price do I need to be at? So they've got some price intelligence out there, and they do know application of the product. So they're out there, at the job sites, talking to the customers, figuring out what they need. They definitely see and hear about their competitors a lot. I think the challenge, and we're starting to shift here as we go through these slides, is like this area, I don't have to coach them that much. This is usually where I start meeting a seller. They're like, Steve, I got to be at this number if I want to work. The only thing that sells it is price. And this is why I'm actually been so attracted to working with companies like you and yours, Matt, is because somewhere in here, you did it in the first of that screen in your demo. When you raise that price up to $140, that's when a salesperson starts going, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? Like, so I would say knowing my market is one thing, but we have to get in deeper with our market to really know how am I actually going to make money in my market, not just drop my price to win jobs.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even, if you look at a 5,000 yard job and you say you need to be $5 lower, that's $25,000 that's gone forever, right? You need to, and the question I would often ask is, if you need to be $5 lower in your mind, can we be $2.50 lower? Can we be $2 lower? What's our premium worth? Um, and again, you need to know what your competitors can do to understand what you're offering compared to those competitors are. I think that's a great segue into tenet number 3, which is knowing what your advantages are in the market. We so often we hear we're a commodity. We offer the same thing that the other guys do. It's gray, it gets hard, but we need to talk about what our advantages are. There's so much that we as producers, not just of concrete but of aggregate and asphalt, put into this work to provide a product and a service that's acceptable to our customers. Steve, how do you probe or teach your sellers how to probe for what those advantages are in the market, and not just what those advantages are, but how their customers value those advantages?
I love it. I strategically put a whole bunch of water that I bought at the grocery store behind me. And I love it when my seller goes, Steve, wait, you have a water thing? What's going on? I said, no, it's a commodity, right? And they're like, and I go, but look at all the variation we have. But most of my sellers, Matt, they're in the Dasani bottle and they're like, yeah, but we don't have electrolytes. We don't have pH, I'm like, they're talking about all the things they don't have. They don't know what their advantages are. And the funny part is Dasani sells for 70% more than the Safeway brand water. Like, what? It's the same product, but they put a different label on it. They market it well. So that's where the sales starts coming in. So one of the big things that I have to like shift the mindset of my sellers, and I usually do it with a couple moves. Hey, if price was the same, who would the customer pick? And that's what you said up there. The price intelligence is great. I'm glad you have that, but let's go find the preference intelligence. Who would they actually pick in a fair fight? And I tell you what, I say this to people all the time. They're like, oh, I don't like the taste of that Arrowhead. Oh, I don't think, that liquid death is actually really good water. Like, they start telling me all this preference of water, and I'm like, right, it's the same things with ready mix. It's the same
Yeah,
thing. They're finding preference in us.
yeah, I think the same thing every time I'm confronted with picking airplane tickets. Do I pick the lowest cost? What's that really valuable to me if I'm paying extra for uh, and not getting the leg room, not getting the baggage checked? That's got real value to me. And I would say that there are parallels to our industry with we provide things that there is value that our customers really do value and are willing to pay extra for. Steve, how would you counsel someone to elicit what those preferences are? They're just as focused on price as we can be. How do we get them thinking about some of those things other than just bottom dollar?
So yeah, I love that question. And it is the sort of the fear that starts popping up. Okay, so I got to find preference, but how am I going to ask? What am I going to do? So before the quote even gets written, my favorite question is, hey Matt, before I quote this for you, I'm happy to put the numbers together. Do you know who would be the best fit for this project already? And shut up and listen. All right. So let's say I quoted somebody. Hey, if let's say I get these quotes to you and all the three of them come back and they're the same price, who would you pick? Or let's say I'm checking in and you've got all the quotes. Hey, I've submitted all my quotes, and you've been taking a chance to look at them. It's been a week and a half. I'm following up. Instead of saying, how do I look? What's my number looking like? Maybe I might say, hey, Matt, I sent you a quote last week. Did you pick the right supplier for that project already? Like, I just have a language that's about preference first, rather than, I feel like a lot of sellers, they just get started on price themselves. They're just so used to hearing it that they're like, just cut to the chase, Matt. Tell me what price I need to be at. No. Let's open up the conversation. So that's
Sure.
my. Did you like that? I don't know.
No,
Let that.
no, 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 that's great. I think, there's no substitute for just asking the customer, right? Why try to read their mind? There are cases when they're going to play their cards closer to their chest, but I've heard, we'd love to work with you guys. You're a preferred producer. We just need to really, it's the value proposition that we're working on. And a big part of value proposition, one, yeah, is the price, but two, what are they getting for that price? And you need to elicit the conversation about, sure, service is important, but what does service mean? That means having enough trucks. That means being able to target what their window is for deliveries. Is this going to go first thing in the morning? Is this going to go in the afternoon? Is there going to be staging for trucks? If there's staging for trucks, I can put more trucks on this and I can provide better service. There's no staging for trucks. This is going to be more difficult, but that makes them look at how they're setting up that job site, right? So it becomes a collaborative discussion about how they can use their preferred supplier, which you're going to explain to them if they don't already know why that's you, right?
Yeah, and I feel like you're right. We miss out on these other conversations. We start commoditizing ourselves. What you said there was I call that last look, when somebody actually literally has two quotes in front of them and one of them is cheaper, and they don't call that guy. They call you and say, hey, Matt, I really want to work with you, but your price is a little high. Can you do anything about it? I used to hate that. I was like, wait, you're going to lower your price? What are you doing? And then all of a sudden I realized, like, wait a second, this is gold. They've already picked you. They want to work with you. They just told you that. But the problem is all we heard was, but your price is too high. So all I have to train a seller to do is say, wait a second, Matt, did you just say you want to work with me? Really? How come? And my sellers get frustrated all the time when I say, really, how come? Because I am grinding it into their head constantly that they just don't ask. Well, because you guys do the this and the that, and we got the this, and your competitor doesn't do that. Like, well, tell me more. Like, why? So eventually, in that conversation, why isn't it worth paying a few dollars more for that? And that's where we get to, Matt. If you were my boss, I'd be like, hey, they wanted $5, but I got them down to just $1 off. Nailed it. And you'd be like, good job, Steve. Like, that's like, it's not that I don't have any flexibility in my pricing, because we know that we have to try and win the work, but it's that I negotiated my way back from the lowest priced guy in the market that nobody wants to work with. Like, that shouldn't be driving my value.
Yeah, there is value there. And I think our customers recognize it. They certainly recognize the value that a company provides or doesn't provide when they're looking up the block waiting for that next truck. And I think you raised an important issue. You know, if somebody says they need $5, well, they may need $5, but what will they take? If you can come down one as opposed to that five, I've been pleasantly surprised in my career how, you know, you may split the difference evenly, you may not split the difference evenly, but you know, coming down two instead of five on that 15 or that one, excuse me, that 5,000 yard job that we talked about, that's $15,000 that you put in your pocket. Again, what kind of volume are you going to have to do if you're matching prices to make up for that? It's big.
And as you get better at it, I mean, I literally get to hear the good stuff in my coaching calls, but I hear them say, Steve, one of my customers called and say, hey, listen, you guys are a little high, but I'm going with you anyway. Like, it's like, it's not always even having to discount. Like, it really starts becoming where they see your value, know your value, and they just pick because they want to drink Evian. That's your water. And I know it costs a little bit more, but it's worth it. So it takes a little while to get there. And I probably should throw a caveat out there. The Walmarts don't hire me, right? The cheapest guy in town does not need a sales coach for his sellers. He just says, what price do I need to drop it to? I only get hired by the ones that actually want to make money, which is why I love working with you guys, because you actually are helping people make money. So there is a company mindset that you need to shift as a ready mix producer. You need to actually decide, we are in the money making business. Let's all be on the same page. And then sales is just where we have to be the tip of the sword out there.
That's great. So a lot of it is about communication with the customer, and rather than an auction, or worse yet, a reverse auction, you're having discussions. Again, and I just keep coming back to value, about the value your company brings. If you treat yourself as a commodity, your customer is going to treat you as a commodity as well.
Yep.
Well, that's great. So really knowing your advantages is about that discussion and communication. Let's move on to our fourth tenet, which is bringing it all together and knowing your margin, right? So we've established what our costs are, and sure, you can work on those costs. It's operations job to push those costs down as low as possible. There's going to be a bottom there. And we've also talked about getting that price as high as possible. But my question to you is, how do you work with your sellers when their response is, sorry, I don't have control of my market. If it's a price of $175, I've got to get to that $175. End of story. How do you keep them having those negotiations or getting past that hard dollar?
Yeah, I think that is the challenge. And sometimes it's not as easy of a fix. It's not just like, oh, here's the move. Because what it is it's a relationship that we've developed with that customer. Now, maybe we're just in a quote and hope kind of relationship, as I call it, where we're just throwing quotes at them all the time and just hoping we get the work. But we don't really have a relationship with the estimator even. We're not really talking to that owner of that smaller, customer. We're just sending quotes and thinking, well, if they pick me, they pick me. So then when now it's time for me to send them numbers that are higher because I'm trying to maintain my margins on a specific job, you're going to lose it because you weren't even winning it in the beginning. So some of the work needs to be done beforehand. So I often get asked questions, how do I follow up with this guy who's ghosting me? And I'm like, well, we need to get to know them first before we get ghosted. So, and I find that before you give the quote is the best time to ask questions. Once they get the proposal, once they get that quote, they're done. They've got their information. They can ghost you now. So I think it truly is like how do we go further up so that we can get to a spot where I can actually ask questions and then decide, ooh, do I actually have preference on this job? Am I going to be able to get it? Can I find any leverage for later when I'm going to need it? And that's the key. So full circle, Matt, it's like, let me get leverage before we go. So when they say, hey, you need to be cheaper, I can say, well, wait a second, Matt, when we talked before, you mentioned that this job site was really close to our plant. You thought that would be strategic for you. You mentioned this, this, and this. Does that not still apply? Like, I need to now use my leverage and my sales skills to now bring it all together and bring it home to be able to toe the line and not let it be something I go, okay, whatever, we'll just match the price. But a lot of sellers just show up to that moment unarmed with any leverage. They forgot to ask those questions, but the buyer sure does have those things. You guys messed us up 3 years ago on that one job. You guys didn't do this. I called you that one time and you didn't do this, so you should give me a discount. They're very good at bringing a little bit of leverage to those meetings, but my sellers aren't always bringing it. They're not selling themselves continuously through the process so that they now are bringing all that leverage that they need, those advantages. They need to actually communicate them comfortably at that moment to say, hey, it's worth getting what you pay for.
Sure. And I think you're bringing up a great point, which is oftentimes we have a relationship with the wrong person. The estimator is the one making a decision, but the relationship we have is with the super on the job. And that's nothing wrong with that. You need your salespeople to have relationships with the people on the job. They're the ones that can keep you from getting that work, but they're not the ones that are necessarily going to be the ones making the decision to give that work. And oftentimes our relationship with an estimator is just, we know the guy's name from sending them quotes. And I think it's really important to build the relationship with those estimators so that they understand what your capabilities are and who your company is, because otherwise they're going to just think the same thing about you. You're just a salesperson. You call, you get a number from them, and you can call them back and tell them if their number is good. And of course, you're right. Once they've got their number, it gets real quiet on the other end of the phone. So I think it's a fantastic takeaway to be prepared to have those discussions early and often.
Well, even when you say the estimator, I'm thinking also beyond that. Sometimes the estimators will say that they make the decision, then you find out the owner is great neighborhood friends or church friends with the VP of sales over at that other company, and that's why they're going with them. It's like, so is the owner really, or is the estimator really making that decision, or are they collecting data for the owner to make that decision? Or even back to the field, they decide. So you really got to understand how these companies make decisions, but you're looking for the value proposition along the way. Maybe the field has some problems working with your competitor, but the estimators don't know. Maybe the estimators have problems with your competitor because they're not getting the information there, but the field loves working with you. So we've got to be able to collect all those resources and figure out the right time to be able to put it together to win the work.
Yeah, I love your example about attending church together. That's actually something I've heard more than once in my career, and more than once in my career, that was the deciding factor. And and I think this is a great way to bring this slide, knowing your margin, back around, which is sometimes you got to walk away. If you know what your margin is, you can identify those jobs and you're not going to fool yourself. That's one of the things I always say. Do not fool yourself. The difference between on a big job making $1 a yard and losing $1 a yard, that's the difference between saving the day and bringing home a real loser. And the job's not to bring losers back with negative margin. The job's to bring high margin or at least positive margins back. And if you build yourself that cushion with a positive margin, you'll have more negotiating room on jobs coming in the future too. So producer,
What, Matt,
know yourself.
Go ahead.
Sure,
Yeah, let me
absolutely.
throw one more thing there that I'm reminded of too. One of the things I see a lot with my sellers is that they like efficiency. So they want to work with a customer they already know. They want to give them one price throughout the whole market of various locations. They want, so the problem is we're always fighting. Sales wants to be efficient in our own ways of like, hey, I want to go with people that already want to work with me. I want to make it easy. So if I could just have the pricing be exactly where I want it, if I have it be priced by customer, then I can win every work, all the work that I want to win. So the challenge comes to now shifting that mindset, shifting that game to say, okay, but we want to actually make it profitable. And what you're really doing here, and your software does it so magically, is it's going to show us by job. Because that, I noticed that when you had all those numbers you could change, you couldn't change distance to job. That was still locked in because that was already pre-programmed into your code. Like, yeah, that doesn't change, but I might be able to help them unload a little faster, maybe avoid their wait time. What is there really spacing there? What are they doing with their ordering? Can we get the load size better? I can tweak some of those things, but that distance, it's the jobs that are variable. They actually do vary. And so I think the great exercise for any seller to do is start realizing, like, some of their best customers may not be their best, and some of their ones that they don't actually go after a lot of their work might be really profitable customers. So I love the idea of tying it back into, yes, we can hit the easy button in sales to go after customers I like and who like me. But if the easy button for them is getting me to lower my price always and be the cheapest, it may not be good for my company. I got to be a better salesperson.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. Well, I want to keep us on track. I'm going to go and drop us into the Q&A session. I think we've had a couple of cues come in here. There you are, Malcolm. Do you want to read those off for us?
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you everyone for the questions as they were going through. If you have any others, it's not too late. Just click that little speech bubble with the question mark in it and we'll get to it. All right, number one, and this is related to knowing yourself. Can average load size for the business or for a specific customer be populated in Slabstack or provided to the user via an integration with our ReadyMix system? So that could be Systine, it could be Command, it could be BCMI.
Sure. On Slabstack, what we do is it's a two-way interface. So not only are we sending quotes into Systine or other third-party dispatch systems, we're able to bring tickets back. And we start calculating what that customer's not just average load size is, but also their unload time and their wait time. Those are great. I would counsel you also need to not just be rearward looking, you need to be forward looking. I had a mentor that did a great job. We were doing a mat pour, 16,000 yard mat pour, and we worked with the customer to not just load sizes, but number of pumps to be used, the pump positioning. Pump guys had what was convenient for them of where to set those pumps. Those would have been nightmares for us trying to get trucks to the pump. Would have involved more trucks, more wait time, and we were able to work with them to get our times down, which further allowed us to sharpen our pencil on the price while still maintaining margin because we were able to drive down the cost. So that's a great question. Yes, we are able to, via interface, bring those numbers back.
Love it. All right. Here's a really good one. So what about hard bid projects? How do these principles apply to hard bid projects?
Matt, do you want to start on that? Because I feel like you've gotten the most, I think last time we talked about it, you talked about how it's not always the low price that wins. Isn't that
sure?
Your experience?
In my experience, hard bid is not always hard bid. You know, even on DOT says, you know, most qualified bidder, and sure, a low price qualifies you for a lot of work. But I've seen, you know, numbers not used because somebody wasn't qualified. So again, I would say being able to point to your qualifications, especially relative to your competitors, is a good way to move past the hard bid.
Yeah, and also I think what happens is, I mean, we always call it like keeping the lights on. I think that some of these big projects that they come in and try and get, we're just like, well, we have to get it at any price possible because it's going to, keep our guys working, And so the problem is that if we've just killed our margin, just killed our year, because it's the largest projects, it's the ones that are the most difficult or the most strenuous on our resources. Now we have to raise the price for everybody else out there. Now we have to make sure that we make up our margin somewhere along the way, or we're finding out that we don't get a new truck this year, or we don't get to upgrade our equipment or whatever we need to do because we lost that margin. So I find it's interesting because we get swayed into thinking that it's all low price is the only thing that matters, but it truly still happens that there is last look that's still being considered. There's still qualified bidders that are being put in there. There's still people saying, hey, we're down to, we won the bid, but there's 2 or 3 suppliers we're still talking to, trying to make sure the numbers are working. At the end of the day, they still have a preference of who they want to go with. And my guess is that they're going to try and make sure that that person gets in, whatever it is. And if you
Sure.
have the data, you can make the adjustments. And if you don't have the data, you're going to be flying blind. But I don't, I feel like it's something that salespeople like to stump me with. Steve, it's a blind bid. It's just a hard bid. It's, they just look at it this way. And it's yeah, but I always hear the stories. There's always somebody that got the work and they shouldn't have gotten it.
Sure. Back to our example, you need to lay it out that, yeah, they're going to pay $5,000 more for their concrete, but what's it worth when you lose 10 loads on the job? That's 10, 15,000, or even more if it's in place, God forbid. Quality is something that we didn't talk about. We talked about service, but quality is another thing that really moves the needle, and something that can be discussed on hard bid. Are they actually, in fact, allowing for all the costs and not just the cost of the concrete?
I love it. And what you're saying, you're really bringing the math into the conversation. I know you said that before, that it's just math, but I mean, it's I oftentimes don't want to talk to the estimator. I want to talk to their accountant and find out how well they work with us and does it actually make money. Now, they don't always know the answer, but the same thing is true on our end. It's yeah, you can talk to the sales guy who's going to just try and win it at whatever they can. But if you're talking to the accountant, which is what your software is really tying together, now I have a more educated way of communicating with my customer, because you're really helping me see the profitability picture, all of the dimensions and the questions that I need to get answers for, so that I can put an educated bid out there and then negotiate properly. I love it.
Yeah, great point. Anybody that's talked to me before knows, 1, I can talk a lot, but 2, I am a math guy. It is math. It's multivariable. It's not just the cost, which is where the math lends itself to, but again, the important math is that margin. That's price minus cost. It's important to look at both sides of the coin. I think you raised a great point. If you give it up on this job, you've got to get it somewhere else. And I would argue that there's not enough COD work in the world that you can charge a premium for to make up those lower margin jobs that you're giving away. You've got to fight for every single dollar in every job that you can.
Totally.
All right. This is one around quote velocity. So we're already quoting a lot and we're already spending a lot of time quoting. So how can you do some of this without slowing down your quoting?
So first, I'll tackle this one, Steve, if you're okay.
Yeah.
First of all, I think that's a little bit of a cop out. I know with tools that we have in Slabstack, what I've heard back from experienced sales administrators is, if they have the information, they can get the quote out in 90 seconds. Even using spreadsheets, my experience was you can get them out in 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah, maybe at the beginning it's going to be a little slower. It's a little bit of a caveat that you've got to have the right information. But even if you have to go out to a separate report and get out that load size, wait times, pour times, maybe it's 15 minutes. And let's say you're the most generous organization in the world and your guys are getting paid $100 an hour. That's $25 to track this down. I would argue that the benefit of understanding your margin, understanding the price, far and away exceeds $25. So yeah, you got to get those quotes out. But even if it's taking you 15, 20 minutes to get a quote out, and I would argue that it's much lower. Um, uh, like I said, I see that as a little bit of a cop out. You can get those quotes out. If you've got more quotes than you can do a good job getting quotes out, you probably need to hire another salesperson or
Yeah, let me
sales
jump onto
administrator.
let me jump onto that, Matt, because it's funny. Like I almost wish for my sellers that it took them 3 hours to put a quote together, because
Why
then
is
they
that?
wouldn't be so quick to quote. They would slow down and say, "Ooh, do I want to quote this project? Let me ask some questions and make sure it's a good job for us, that they want to use me." Like almost the faster the quote goes, the less we feel we have to be a salesperson and just fire quotes out. It's like, no. So it's funny because in my world, like, man, slow down, don't quote yet, because they're going to ghost us once they get the quote. But it's funny, I do hear that pushback of like, oh, the quotes take too long to do. And I'm like, well, then great. Let's cherry pick them more. Let's find the right customers to quote to. So many of my customers, I talked about quote and hope, they do a lot of quote and nope. They don't get any work from it. They just quote them. And it's like, because they can. So I love that it's not too easy of a button. But man, if anything, I'd want it to take them all day to do write one quote, and then they would slow down, especially those big projects, and take some time to get to know some people.
Yeah, we could have a whole separate discussion on qualifying bids, but um, do you really need to be fast when half of what you're sending out is electrical work on a school rehab that's 2.5 hours away? Maybe for a customer that's not going to use you anyway,
Yeah.
um, slowing down a little bit and understanding these things. And to bring it back to what you said, understanding what the advantages that you have on a particular quote really makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, you can get them out in 90 seconds, but really, should you be getting out in 90 seconds? And I think we would both be arguing,
Yeah.
no, you shouldn't. You can be too fast at this.
I love it.
So I want to be mindful of time. I think we're coming up on the 45-minute mark. So certainly have a few more questions. We'll try to address these over email. But just to keep us within the allotted time, can you go to the next slide, please? We'll just wrap here. So if anybody has any questions about anything that we discussed today, here are the two email addresses of Matt and Steve. I'll just hold on this slide for a second if people want to scribble it down and take a screenshot. Big thanks to Matt and Steve for co-presenting today. This was really a labor of love. We probably did this practice run through 3 times. These guys never did it the same way twice. This is clearly something they know backwards, forwards, in and out. So I'm glad that you all were on and were able to kind of experience that kind of riffing and that chemistry and just that deep well of stories to pull from to illustrate the points. We're going to be doing another webinar at the end of April focused around AI. We'll send out some details around that soon to everybody on the email distribution list. That's probably how you heard about this one. So that's how we'll tell you about the next one. If you want this recording for the webinar, I will circulate via email the recording. So don't worry, you're not going to have to do anything or access anything. Just hang out and keep checking your email inbox like you always do. If you want to circulate it to other folks internally, that's where you'll get it. And I think with that, we can wrap. Matt, Steve, unless you have any last words, I think we can just say thank you all so much for joining. We know everyone's quite busy, so thanks for being with us today. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. And yeah, that's it from us.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone. Thanks for being on today. Bye-bye.